Good morning, everyone. Morning, Art. Have begun. Um, I seem to be alone at the moment, but that may change over time. Um, oh goodness, amazing things happening today. Uh, Elon Musk just caught the first stage of his rocket right back at the launch site where it had taken off. And it was the most breathtaking moment I've seen in flight for many, many years. And um, it's like watching the transition from a catapult to a guided missile. And we've now taken the next step that's at least that big. um, we as human beings have done. And um, Elon Musk has certainly achieved an amazing thing that must scare everybody to their bones because um, now the Chinese and the Russians are going to be wanting to get the technology that made that possible, and it's an incredible amount of uh, expertise and artificial intelligence and supercomputers. All that stuff is behind it. And if you haven't seen this launch, CNN has a nice little 10-minute video of the launch, and about 5 minutes into it, it starts the return of this rocket to its launch pad and captures it with giant chopsticks. Unbelievable feat. Just amazing. Human beings couldn't guide that, couldn't land such a vehicle. But obviously, artificial intelligence can do it and think faster than we can. And that made it possible. But holy smokes, what a leap that is in technology to see that. Um, so it's nice. So what I'm saying is, an imagination for evil, which is today's topic, is very much on the agenda now because um, having the imagination and the ability to do that is just phenomenal to think of the stakes that are involved and what isn't involved to make that possible. Um, I, I think I'm going to be chewing on it in my psyche for weeks, probably, to think about how complex that was, what an achievement it was, and what the possibilities of it are, because it should scare the bejesus out of us in terms of what artificial intelligence can do, I guess. So today we're going to work with Liliana Wahba's. Oops, here's Jordan. Great. Um, Good morning, Jordan.
Morning.
Did you happen to see the Elon Musk's bunch catch their rocket today?
I just saw that about 4 minutes ago. I was on Instagram and it's coming down, it's coming down. And I'm like, oh, I hope it doesn't hit that thing because I didn't have any context. And then I went, oh, it's gonna grab it. Oh, that's like for outer space or somewhere where not just landing, which is complex. That was wild.
Yeah, unbelievable. And I was just saying to the group here that it's like it's a leap of human intelligence that's like the leap from catapults to guided missiles.
It really is. It was
Yeah.
what was wild was I was like, oh, it's gonna hit the crane thing because I caught it halfway in the middle, like it's coming down,
Yeah.
and I'm watching, thinking, oh, it's gonna land, and I'm going, oh no, it's gonna explode because those things on the bottom they're not opening, and it's not gonna. There was all this expectation, and then I stopped and went, what do I know? This is a blind spot. I'm not watching what I think I'm watching,
Yeah.
and then it just hung out in the air, and I went, oh, that's even more impressive that it's hovering, getting to a certain spot to where it can. Yeah,
Just
that
grab it.
was. I saw that maybe 5 minutes ago, 4 minutes ago. Right,
Yeah.
right as I was making my coffee, it popped
So
on.
everybody who's watching this, as we're working on the startup here, go to CNN and watch this 5 minutes, the last 5 minutes of CNN's 10-minute video on the SpaceX flight. You will see what we're talking about, and it is just impossible to understand the implications of it. It's as I say, it's like the advance from catapults to guided missiles, and now we've had this next advance, and the implications of it in terms of artificial intelligence and what artificial intelligence can do. Supercomputers, it would take a supercomputer to do all those calculations as quick as it had to be done. Um, and then all the thinking and technology that went into building that thing. Oh my goodness. It's just uh
Well, it's
it's
so deceptively simple because you know GPS and accurate on a surface is one thing, but targeting a point in three-dimensional space at a certain height. I mean, I'm sure it has its relative telemetry points of
mhm.
relative to the Earth and where it is, and but instead of just where it is on the planet, where it is in the volume of the space, that yeah,
Yeah, and
that's
weather and all kinds of things.
yeah,
I mean,
way exactly.
I remember in artillery school, the hardest part of artillery school is understanding MET, what they call MET, which is um, firing around into the weather and knowing what a drop of rain will do to that round during its trajectory, right?
Well, and even long range shots where they have to take into account the curvature of the Earth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. So, I mean, the amount of calculations that took place in that last 5 seconds of that flight, where it dropped from about 2,000 kilometers per hour to zero in like 5 seconds. It's kind of,
Right.
okay.
Yeah, that's a couple of G.
Amazing. So,
Well, that's the
anyways,
right there. That's an interesting piece there. The inner weather of that many G's affecting the displacement and the deflection of even the pieces that are monitoring itself inside,
yeah,
and being able to understand where it is at deceleration points.
yeah, yeah, incredible. And so it brings up this essay that we're going to talk about today, which is Imagination for Evil. Um, and one can imagine uh, Elon Musk, the mad scientist, if he put his prodigious mind and amount of money to work for something evil, it would be bonkers. And so there are a lot of issues. I mean, my mind is still buzzing with the possibilities of what it can mean for everything that we do as human beings. Um, you know,
Well, and the cool thing is, I think that a lot of people demonize him But they do so unduly because just like neuroses, people will hang on to them, kicking and screaming to the death. I mean, almost like they'd rather lose a family member than give up a neuroses.
Mhm.
And what's interesting to me is with him, he looks to see things as they are.
Mhm.
So, he's like any other human being, but it's kind of like Georgia O'Keeffe. He may be terrified every moment of his life, but it doesn't let him stop doing anything. So
Yep.
he's also, it's not even afraid to say no. He calls the truth out. I mean, I
Yeah.
saw him in an interview with Don Lemon, and he was just slamming Don Lemon on the floor because Don was playing a narrative and trying to get him to say things. And, he didn't say this, but he's not a fish, so he wasn't baited. It's like, and then you start to notice the questions that certain journalists, quote unquote, asked, and you see right through the question, and the question tells you more about the questioner than it does what they're asking for you to say.
Yeah.
So he's got a noggin like no other. So, and I
Yeah.
think part of it is just he's based and he's just straight in. Um, Basically, he has a sniper mind. It is what it is, and you can't hit a target if you don't go exactly with that raindrop, the
Right.
the curvature of the Earth, and all the different variables.
Sure. So, okay, so we're going to talk about The Imagination for Evil by Liliana Liviano Wahba, who is a Brazilian. And she has this quote at the beginning of her essay: "Innocence was his blinder," quote unquote. And that comes from a novel by Herman Melville called Billy Budd. And so, um, we our blinders in connection with this morning would be, oh, Elon Musk would never do anything evil. Right. Okay. Good
Well, and
Lord.
I think also too, that's that's kind of badass expectation philosophy, expecting the opposite, where of what's happening in such a way that then we're still blinded because all we're doing is we're not looking at what's there, we're looking at the opposite of what's there,
Yeah,
and then that's just turning your back on facts. But
right.
I think the innocence was his blinder. That's kind of a 20th century expectation, and
Mhm.
being a show pony and performance and being all that, where also innocence can help you see what actually is. Like a 4-year-old will call you out on something, and then you go, "Oh, I didn't notice," and it's so obvious. I mean, once it's been seen, it can't be unseen.
Yeah,
So I think the innocence was his blinder. Flip the opposite, but also look at what is actually there.
yeah, yeah. And so Kathy is here and State of Awakening is here. But Kathy, I want to thank you for your birthday wish last week. It was much appreciated. Um, and State of Awakening said, I would highly recommend checking into the tweets he's been posting and then coming to your own conclusions about his motivations currently. Yeah, um, I can, I have an imagination for that, uh, since he appeared on the stage with our former president last week in Butler, Pennsylvania. Um, Obviously, he wants contracts from the government, regardless of which party wins. But I guess I have to say that he's bucking for contracts and sees the value of it. Anyway, okay, so I'm going to begin to read the first paragraph. Jung considered modern society to be in urgent need of a collective conscience, and analytical psychology would provide a model of pragmatic intervention. Ideally, the process of individuation would simulate widespreading actions to support individuals and society in building community with values and meaning linked to welfare, spiritual harmony, and nature, and paying due respect to integrity. Being familiar with the psyche and the somber components, in parentheses, shadow, close parentheses, that go along with the noblest of ideas. Jung foresaw certain hurdles and defenses that would affect groups and individuals not only in their very intimate and family relations, but also as regards their community ties, especially worried about the political leaders of the time and the deterioration that authoritarian regimes would cause to society. Jung dedicated much of his writings to the critique of dogmatism, inflation of the ego, psychopathic power, credulity, and unconsciousness of myopic followers of so-called leaders, quote unquote. These works were largely in line with what he called, quote, confronting the shadow, unquote, often rooted in the religious theme of the struggle between good and evil, in the representation of the divine, and in psychic projections. Okay, that's the first paragraph. Do you have any comment? And we have a new guest here.
Just while I was getting coffee, the whole, if Elon was looking for government contracts, good.
Yeah.
Mind like that, going into bureaucracy, you want to talk about squeezing out some fluff.
I suppose, yeah.
278 government agencies, and he's like, yeah, we could do it with 99. And it's probably off the cuff, but at the same time. Yeah. But yeah, so Jung also seeing through the fluff, inflated ego, psychopathic power, credulity. Incredulous and credulity are, you hear similar. But the myopic followers piece strikes me too, where, be careful putting your power out on somebody else for them to wield it, because then you get, it's like the ocean. If you're in the ocean, you don't feel how strong it is. But you get to the edge of trying to leave the ocean and you're ankle deep and the tide's going out. You can feel the power sinking you into the sand, pulling you out, and realize how much, if you get into a riptide, then you're just going to need to ride it.
Yeah. Yeah, you definitely need to do that or you're going to wear yourself out. Yeah. Okay. So next paragraph, thank you for everyone for coming. This paper sets out to knit together observations on evil and credulity and the importance of awareness of these polarities in these days of intensive conflict of an ethnic, religious, and economic nature, all of whose symptoms of arbitrariness in the exercise of power, of technology stripped of any humanism, and suicidal despair endorse the fear that is born in a world in convulsion. Inspiration for the article was found in the expression used by Jung concerning the importance of remaining alert to the imagination for evil, remaining alert to the imagination for evil. And just as I was saying this morning, and the reason I brought it up this morning is this leap of humankind that was achieved today. It's quite a remarkable achievement, and the implications of it are profound, I would say. The
Mhm.
what has been achieved is beyond anything that I ever thought was possible. I mean, both Debbie and I said this morning, I never imagined anything like that being possible in my lifetime. NASA was firing these rockets out into the Atlantic Ocean and never even considered, I'm sure, bringing them back to Cape Kennedy and landing them.
Well, yeah, and the ocean is a pretty vague and unbold target. It's, you know,
Yeah,
um, it's interesting here, the imagination for evil. It's reminded me of James Hellman's book title, um, A Terrible Love of War,
yeah,
where oftentimes, even in just dreams, we have these conflicts so that, in a sense, we're never a couple steps away from it, except for when we start to have some kind of dignity and difference where I'm not listening to someone for dissent.
yeah,
You can listen to them and you don't have to say anything. I mean,
yeah,
so there's a piece here I think we're getting into, just remaining alert to. There's a radar there to, again, see what is, not what
yeah.
you expect it to be.
Deb Wagner says, did the money make him crazy or did the crazy make him money? Well, I wouldn't call him crazy. I think it's accepted in public discussion that he is autistic. And what autistic people are is very focused. They can really focus, and a lot of computer programmers can be autistic because they don't have to interact with human beings. And so they like to be in their cubicle and just focus on their thing. And, there's nothing wrong with that. We have two members of um, our Wednesday group who are autistic, and they get very focused on one thing that they think is the most important thing, and but they're wonderful human beings otherwise. So uh,
Also, I think also too with autism, if I remove the title and the expectation, there's a piece of no, they're simply not a follower, but that's the label everyone's put on them. But when you look into it, that focus, that zeal, that drive has nothing to do with external forces half the time. They're actually feeling what's going on. Almost like some people are looking through a window painted black and they're looking out and they're seeing the weather. I mean, they see
yeah,
what's up.
sure.
Mm.
So, I mean, Fisk, you came on.
Hi,
Did you have
Skip.
something to say?
Yeah, hello.
Hi, Jordan. I'm
Hi
so
there.
Hi.
listened. Thank you so
We
much.
yeah,
Wonderful
we
conversation so far. I caught the tip at tail end of what you were saying about I could never imagine this possible, like the
yeah.
evil. There's some things that you read or listen to and you think, oh my God, I couldn't imagine doing that, or what are they accessing then that you're not? What faculty of evil in your mind are they accessing or in your imagination? Do they have access to that you don't have, if that makes sense?
Are you talking about autistic people?
No, just generally,
Oh, I see what you're
Well,
saying.
people like
Oh,
evil,
yeah.
what are they accessing that you haven't, if that
well,
makes sense?
they're accessing the shadow. Okay, and
Okay.
in terms of Jung's psychology, he would say that they're accessing a creativity that none of us would even think of.
Right.
Okay. And for example, our former president accessed in current affairs attitudes that were deep in the American psyche that
Mm.
none of us ever imagined. Okay. In other words, um, well, let me give you an example of an incident that occurred on one of these sessions where one of our colleagues was criticizing men generally, and men in red states. Um, and she said she just couldn't imagine why they were thinking the way they were about whatever, Donald Trump, I guess. And and I had to say, wait a minute, slow down. Those men are the salt of the earth. Those men are the men who kept me alive in Vietnam. And and so I can't diss all men or even those men because of their current attitude. I don't yet understand. I mean, I do understand in a Jungian context how we got to where we are because we're experiencing the shadow in our current affairs. And Jung worried. He hoped that by a little bit, good would be bigger than evil. But he pointed out that it's like the yin yang in Chinese philosophy. They're pretty much equal. And you have to, you as a human being, each one of us has to make our own judgment about what's right and what's wrong at a given point in time. Right. And I mean, for example, I never believed in the Vietnam War from 1962 on because, my father showed me the evil of it on the docks in Yokosuka, in Japan, in the summer of 1962. This was 3 years before the Marines went in to Vietnam. But in fact, we had been there for some time. So I never believed in it. But nonetheless, when I had the opportunity to join the Marines, I joined, knowing full well that there was a likelihood that I would go to Vietnam. And I, in fact, did go to Vietnam as a Marine first lieutenant. And that was 8 years later that happened. And but I wanted to know one of the reasons I did it was I wanted to know why the war was wrong. Okay. From my own experience. Okay. We had lots of demonstrators against it back in the day. And I had been raised in the military, and my mind didn't work that way to dodge the draft. I didn't think of that as part of my life because I was a son of a career naval officer. And I wanted to know what was wrong with what we were doing in Vietnam. I found out. When I went, I learned what was wrong. But the reasons that I found were nothing like anything that the demonstrators were saying. Okay. And so anyway,
Well,
so evil is there. Go ahead.
I would chime in too that I appreciate that example. And then I think in this, to respond to your question, Fizz, I think the shadow, it's important to address that, but also that's the shadow somewhat abstract. And I would then add to that example, Dr. Jordan Peterson's quote that it's important to be a dangerous person. And I think he said a dangerous man, but I'll generalize it, a dangerous person. And the interviewer who was interviewing said, well, wait, do you mean I need to go out and promote violence? He said, absolutely not. He said, but if you're not dangerous and you act peaceful, that means you're just weak. And what happens is he brings up the example of a martial artist where, if I know that if I punch someone right there, it's going to overload their nervous system and shut them down for however long. Well, that's pretty violent.
Yeah.
But the thing is, there's an ability to survive in the wild of in martial arts learning pressure points, for example.
Mm.
Well, some of those could be kill points. Some of them
Yeah.
could be healing points.
Yeah.
But what happens is then you voluntarily have that ability for violence, not just under control, it doesn't drive you. And so it's there as a tool in nature, just like hunting, as it would be. But I think what happens is the capacity for evil, when you get into pure nature inside, the shadow, the unconscious, even the soul, well, that'll tear you up because it's so much the universe rather than so specifically us. So I think part of the capacity or imagination for evil is understanding the forces that go on inside. And I would add that a lot of people who don't do things for moral reasons, to me, that means they're bad people on a leash. If they're actually thinking about doing those things and then not doing them, that's to me what's problematic. So I think the ability to see urges, thoughts, and it can be inner weather washing through. Maybe evil goes through, so I open my Kevlar umbrella and shield myself. But it's the kind of thing where I think we don't fall prey to unbased directions, unbased urges, desires is a thought, because I think that I did skip rock up with the shadow and then what was actually behind Vietnam, the ships going across the harbor in Japan. Well, that's generals who are going for rank and they can't get rank except during war. So it's the kind of thing where that's gunning for a promotion rather
Yeah.
than gunning for peace.
So the nature of the shadow of the individual, is that what works with the evil? Is if it allows evil or if it doesn't? And it's a crazy question, but I'm just thinking of myself and, for example, Stalin's shadow, the ability to kill millions
Uh-huh.
of people.
Right.
Is there a
Gosh.
difference between my shadow and his shadow, even though I mean, I
Well,
do martial arts and
the only difference is he had the levers of power available to him, and you don't. Okay, I mean, this week we were reading in our advanced group. I'm going through the Red Book line by line, and this week we were discussing uh, the sacrificial murder, which is one of the chapters of the Red Book. And in the sacrificial murder, um, there is a dead girl, and Jung, in a vision that Jung had, a feminine figure whose identity was covered told him that he had to uh, cut the liver out of this dead girl and eat it. And he was really grossed out by that, of course, as anyone would be. And, this is coming from his psyche. And he did it. And then the figure in his vision identified herself as his soul. And the point being that was in him. Okay. That whole thing was in him. And if I look at my mother-in-law, who's now going to be 94 on December 7th, is um, a woman who has led the perfect archetypal mother life. Okay. Perfect throughout her life. And she has never wanted to make a single ripple. She would like to get out of life without leaving a ripple on humanity. Okay. She bore two children. One of them is my wife. And then she just lived the archetypal life of a mother all the way through. And and now she's blind and is able to listen to books on tape. Um, and she's just hoping to leave life without leaving any ripples whatsoever. Okay. Now, there are people like that, but most of us want to make a splash here and there. Okay, most of us would like to jump into the swimming pool making a cannonball splash every so often, right? And when we do that, or when mostly boys, I guess, but when we do that in the swimming pool, we interrupt the swimming of other people in the pool, right? And um, and it's good for our well-being to do that. I never was much of a cannonball guy, but there were certainly plenty of them around me, and I never thought much about it. But as I think about it now, it's really a perfect metaphor for the way most of us are. Most of us would like to make a wave every so often, right? And over something, who knows what it is. And so that's the shadow, which Jung at one point called the power devil. Okay, because his point was that the opposite of love is not hate, it's power. Okay, it's the will to power. Okay, and
I think that right there, I think that brings up a great example to your question. Is your shadow different than Stalin's shadow, for example? And I think both of you have brought in personality, the cannonball, or do you do a can opener, but you're still interrupting the other people swimming, making a splash. So I personally say no. I don't take responsibility for Stalin's shadow. I have no desire to be that evil. But then I look at, the difference of love, the opposite of love being power. I would look at the opposite of addiction as being connection. And Stalin then addicted to this huge tantrum. I mean, I don't want to go into, is he a 4-year-old screaming and moaning, except with people's lives? But I then start to de-psychologize things and go, no, he is responsible for evil. I don't care what his mom or his dad did or did not do, or what environmental consideration drove him to. Now there's the word responsibility. And I think then, with a personality question there, I think you were asking, Fizz, is your shadow different than Stalin's? I would say I hope so. It's like,
So evil needs particular conditions.
I think so. I think otherwise, I think otherwise, I
yeah,
think
I never,
driven by
I,
something that you don't agree with, which you're going to fight it and dilute it. And so I think the whole idea of possession and like The Exorcist and all of that is so interesting to me, because I always go, well, Stranger Things, but that's kind of, I mean, for someone to be completely overwritten, that's kind of impossible. I mean, how do you? But then I look at people in prison camps and how they die inside and they have no drive. Well, they're not evil, but they're inert. So they're an empty vessel able to be steered around. So I think there are all these personality questions. I mean, I appreciate you bringing up the cannonball, Skip, because that does make the splash across, when you're good at it, a splash across the whole Olympic-sized swimming pool. People in the shallow end feel it.
yeah.
And, you hear it. And if you're underwater, you get the compression on your ears. So I think the whole affect, that, what's credulous versus what's untrustworthy, which would be incredulous. I think you both have brought up the personality question. And then I would say responsibility to your own mode of being is important. I mean, I don't see, even if I had the levers of power in front of me, the word Stalin would never even come to mind. I wouldn't go, oh, look what I'm going to do.
Mm.
I'd go, well, we need to be careful with those things. How about we lock some of them down, because this is not a variable we need to utilize. And then that's
Right.
my personality. It's not, oh, look at what I want to do,
Well,
simply because that's not the kind of splash I want to make.
yeah, I mean, culture matters, okay? And so if I give an example, and maybe this applies to you too, um, I I never imagined myself as an evil person. Never, never, never. Okay. Uh, I've done some evil things. Okay, some things that um by by many standards would be considered bad. Um, and and some of them I'm sorry for, and some of them I'm not. Okay. Uh, and some of them uh, apply both ways. For example, in our society, divorce is not a good thing, right? But after 17 years of marriage, I left my first wife, including my three daughters, who were ages 5, 8, and 12 at the time. Okay, now that sounds like a pretty bad thing. I did it in part, okay, and this isn't the only reason, but um, my ex-wife and I were fighting quite a bit. And I mean, 2, 3 times a week. And she was always bringing up every transgression that we had had for 17 years. She'd go back from the start and say, "Remember when you did this? This is just like that," right? And she would lay it on me. And I would always respond in the same ways. I mean, we had this same argument for 17 years. It got bigger and heavier over the years. And finally, one day, my 8-year-old daughter sent a fishing line down our spiral staircase with a note on it. And it said simply, "Please stop fighting." And I saw that note. And at that moment, I knew that we couldn't. I knew that it was not going to be possible. And and so I made the decision at that moment, actually, to leave them behind. Not, I didn't leave them behind, but I realized that the marriage had to be different. And and ultimately I did divorce, but I did not divorce. I mean, in some sense, I did not divorce my first wife or my children. I visited them a couple of hundred times over their growing up years, by making a 400-mile trip each way to see them. And this year, my eldest daughter will be 50, and we're as close today as I would have ever imagined if I had stayed in the family. And all of my daughters are more or less that way with me. I don't notice any different. I can't imagine any difference in their behavior toward me than they would have had if I had been there. And um, and I still love my ex-wife like a sister. Okay, so that's unusual probably for American divorces, but my current wife and I have been to dinner with my ex-wife and her new husband multiple times over the last 35 years or whatever it is since we've been separated. It's almost 40 years now. Um, and so I was able to hold together something that was divine in one sense. I this is the woman that bore my children, and so I respect her in every way. I just didn't want to live with her anymore. because she was beating down my psyche, and it was just getting too oppressive for me. And I realized it was oppressive for my kids too.
Just that there, the physicist comment of that. So external forces are important. That your daughter was saying, "Stop your evil in my environment." You guys being taken over by, whatever, and allowing actually your ex-wife bringing up all those things from the past. That's weaponizing memories, which is not connection. And honestly, it actually does not address any current issue. All it does is fuel, throwing literally gasoline on a fire, to make the existing problem more prevalent.
It's the conditions, isn't it? It's the conditions. You remove yourself from that condition, I think evil that situation was horrible, it invites evil.
Sure. And
I'm really sorry, I've got to go because I've got to pick up my daughter, but it's been lovely.
Can you give us a one couple sentence about how you're here and so on? Since this is the first time you've appeared to us.
It was Red Book. I was looking at, I got Jung's Red Book, and I was just studying active imagination through Ibn Arabi, and I came across, I know of Carl, but I never knew much of the Red Book, so I started studying that, and I looked for videos to help me.
Okay.
So you've got an extensive library. But I didn't realize that you were live with lots of sessions as well. So I just joined, and I thought, let me say hi.
Hi. Well, we're here every Saturday morning or Sunday morning at 10 a.m. U.S. Eastern time. Where do you live? With what part of the world?
I'm in England, in Berkshire, so around Windsor. I don't know if you know Windsor.
In a very rough kind of way, I do. Yeah. Okay.
So that's
it's delightful to have your visit, and we hope you'll come back.
I will. Thank you. Lovely.
To all of our YouTube audience who've been very loyal over the years. I mean, we have about 25 people that come almost every Sunday, and then about maybe 350, 400 that watch the video within the week. And so you can check that by the hits that are shown on the YouTube channel. But we have an advanced group which is going through the Red Book right now. And we've just completed the sacrificial murder. And so
these sessions, are they, do you pick the topic, or can someone just come? Like, if I had questions watching your videos from the Red Book, could I come and ask them here? Or
surely you can do that. And we don't do this for money. Okay. We don't do this for money, and we're not Jungian analysts. We're not proposing that we are, but we know a lot. Okay. Because as you see, we have like 1,400 videos here now. And I've been studying it since 1980.
That's incredible.
Yeah, we're not therapists, for sure.
I don't want therapists.
I'm glad of that, actually.
Do what Jung said, don't become Jungian.
Right. Yeah, I'm glad I'm
why
Jung.
Are you becoming Jungian for?
Yeah, I love that quote. I'm glad I'm Jung, so I don't have to be Jungian.
Yeah, I love that. And I don't think it's about that at all. So you need to shine your own star.
Right. Well,
exactly what he was saying too. You can shine your own star.
Yeah. So come by. We welcome everyone pretty much. I mean, back in the old days, we used to have Zoom bombs, but only a couple. We have taken care of those pretty much. So anyway, peace and good luck with your daughter. Anyway, those advanced reading group sessions are on Wednesdays at 5 p.m. U.S. Eastern time. So so that would be like 10 p.m. for you.
Oh, bedtime.
Yeah.
Okay, but I'll definitely give it a go.
Yeah. Okay. See you another time. Thank you for being here.
Bye-bye.
Okay. So let's see. Richard said, with the upcoming election, Pope Francis advised us to make a personal choice to choose the lesser evil. I admire Francis. He gives so many controversial statements, but never backs down or apologizes. Well, I think that's good
Well,
advice.
I think in politics there is never a lesser evil. Politicians are liars. How do you know they're lying? Their mouth is moving.
Yeah.
So, I think that it's not a lesser evil. Lesser evil, I think, is a sensationalist way to say you don't agree with me. And I
Yeah.
think that's important to get over yourself, and
Right.
don't flatter yourself that, oh my, I have so much against them. I always look at the quote of, they doth protest a little too much,
Yeah.
meaning somehow they're actually attracted to that, but there's some moral more keeping them from actually moving over to it. So I would be really careful about the lesser of two evils thinking,
Mhm.
because I think it's lost its meaning.
In a sense, but we're trying to understand the concept of yin and yang, the concept of there
Mm-hmm.
being a shadow in everyone. And so in that passage from the Red Book, the sacrificial murder, Jung had to accept the fact that that was in him. Okay.
Yes.
And
There's the Native
and
American story of their inside everyone is two wolves, a dark wolf and a light wolf.
right.
And then the little boy asked the chief, well, or a little girl asked the chief, well, which one wins? And he says, depends on which one you feed.
Yeah.
And the trickster there is feed both. Because if one gets overgrown, it becomes unwieldy and imbalanced, and it does not have its healthy counterpart.
Yeah.
So, I mean, just because I'm doing something, I need the ground under my feet to support me. So the dark and the light is important, but I think the dark and the light has nothing to do with good and evil.
Yeah.
They're different.
Let's see. Skipping ahead a bit, Return to Being says, quote, I can see, quote, it, but it, quote, it cannot see, quote, I. It is actually unconscious, impersonal, amoral, pleasure driven, an entity of darkness and perpetual bondage to death, time, sin, samsara. Okay, not a bad.
Except that amoral and sin are not the same thing. And samsara is a requisite past constituent. So that whole statement, I think we have to be careful, because amoral is not immoral. Amoral means it doesn't even need morals. They're not even present.
Yeah.
So it's that whole philosophical talking about the non-thing. Well, if there's such a non-thing, then don't talk about it at all. So I think there's an implication here. And sin is then a judgment, of a moral judgment. For then lesser of two evils is what you do that sin for me also? Are there universal sins, or are they amoral, not immoral? So I think there's an important piece there to be careful when you have a string of words that implies they're all synonymous, and several of those are absolutely not even near each other.
Yeah. Right. I'm going to read ahead in the book now, but there are some good comments coming up on YouTube, which are worth are worth considering. So please do consider. A recent tragic incident took place in the interior of Brazil's southeastern region, fits the proposed theme addressed to the power of evil when innocence or ingenuousness encounters cruel psychopathy. The incident involved a social worker just over 30 years of age, married and the mother of a child. She lent assistance to a 65-year-old man she called Granddaddy. She went to his small farm on her own to teach him to read and write, and even see to his personal needs, such as cutting his toenails. The catastrophe happened on her last visit. The man raped and killed her with a hammer blow to the head. Her husband was disconsolate, feeling guilty for not having foreseen that this fatality might occur and for not having protected her. The murderer kept a photograph with words describing her figure and several "I love you" notes, but he and a neighboring farmer who acted as an accomplice had criminal records as rapists. The tale of Little Red Riding Hood deals with a girl's initiation and the need to lose childhood innocence. For the wolves are hungry. What happens when the age of innocence is over, yet still remains in an inappropriate form and even on behalf of good? In our professional practices as psychotherapists, we come upon patients who put the blame for their suffering on all that is alien to them and find it tremendously hard to perceive their own participation in what happens, or else they blame themselves so generically that they also remain unaware of the effects they produce on others. Here, evil is diffuse, the world being made of traps into which they are bound to fall. So there is no point in their trying to become aware of these traps. So these patients are left regretting their guilt, be it external or internal. There's yet another condition, which is when a film of apparent innocence protects one from recognizing what would be considered evil. As an example, a patient aged 25 who was adopted attributed to her parents and her surroundings an aura of almost magical protection and felt it extremely difficult to understand situations of conflict. She was always surprised and disturbed in groups when for some reason she was ignored or someone spoke badly of her. Very intelligent and respected in her postgraduate studies and career, her face was that of a child, which also made her dream of a happy marriage. Although that she never got close to boys, not knowing what to do and how to act, she dreamed of a suitable and well-intentioned partner showing up one day. In this particular case, the defenses against feelings of abandonment and orphanhood added to this psychic state of absolute purity and innocence. Regardless of the underlying psychological dynamic, malice and innocence appeared to be factors that actually interpenetrate in dangerous games that can even lead to catastrophic outcomes, as seen in the newspaper incident. Okay, I'm going to stop there for a minute because the next part is about Melville, but comments about this girl?
I think the kicker to me is what happens when the age of innocence is over, yet still remains in an inappropriate form and even on behalf of good. So an inappropriate form, meaning distorted.
Right.
I would say what happens, Stalin grows or Rumi grows. Choose. Except then, just like Fizz had said, shine your own star. I'd say ultimately, is a choice even needed? Just shine your own star. And what happens, I think that inappropriate form may be something poorly developed that can be weeded out or nourished to finish the development. So how much innocence do you carry? And is it ingenuous, which means innocent or trustworthy? Or is it incredulous, which means untrustworthy? So I think the difference, the incredulous and ingenuous here are, he didn't say incredulous, but the opposite of ingenuous is pretty much that. I think that, what parts of us remain in an inappropriate form, and also even on behalf of the good. I mean, some people, for example, who go to Africa and do the Iboga root ritual, allegedly they don't have any, it wipes clean their past. They don't have the triggers because they're no longer driven by the things that weren't in their best healthy interest. I think there can be kind of a spiritual elitism to that kind of, iboga thinking, but at the same time, that's saying they went back to their own nature.
Yeah.
I think that's important.
Right. So Cherie asks the question, why did Thomas Jefferson study when he was a student the Magna Carta of 1226? And she later corrects it to 1215. And the spelling is Magna Magna Carta, not Mega Carter. But the answer to that, and I get this from my legal background, is the Magna Carta is one of the bases of law for the entire Western world. And it's certainly the basis for many legal briefs going all the way back to the Magna Carta and sometimes even before. And we, in the United States, except for the state of Louisiana, we live in a country of stare decisis, which means that we look back at previous cases basically before we make a decision. Whereas in Louisiana, which goes by the law of Napoleon, they only look at the absolute incident right now. What does that tell us? But in most cases in the United States, we follow precedent, and that means that if human beings have decided something a certain way, we stick with that. Now, the exception is a few recent Supreme Court rulings where they have overruled precedent. One case being Roe versus Wade, which I think a lot of people feel was evil to overrule it. But on the other hand, we had other cases that skip my mind for the moment, but they did have to be overruled. So sometimes we have to change things in the breach, even though we don't like to do that. And so the justification in the current Supreme Court is that, this was badly decided, Roe v. Wade. But, that
I think
this too can change.
Well, I think too, you're deciding in the breach thing applies to this patient, age 25, who you're speaking of, who is this idyllic state of absolute purity and innocence.
Mm-hmm.
As he says, because of her defenses against feelings of abandonment and orphanhood, meaning she never cracked the seed. She never fought her way out of the egg. So I think the interesting thing there is, what comes to mind is, the kids who are giving participation trophies just so they don't feel bad. Well, oh my Lord, you're just moving them along with no rites of passage. Yes, they get older,
Yeah,
but they don't get wiser. And the thing is, wisdom comes from intense experience, and usually intense experience comes from really poor decision making. It's like you took a risk and it failed, but you learned. So I think this whole piece of this absolute purity and innocence he's describing with this 25-year-old idyllic state of absolute purity and innocence, it's unexperienced. It doesn't know how to navigate away from the things that would be not pure or would be not innocent, or move to them and work through them. So, I mean, there's a concept here I see of don't waste trouble, where if you're always avoiding everything, be it abandonment or orphanhood, or just simply avoiding
Making waves.
making waves,
Yeah.
exactly. And, what happens, say, for example, if, you know, you and I disagree, well, I don't know that we've ever gotten into a yelling match. I don't think that's something we do. We
Well,
we tussle, but we also actually more discuss than tussle because I think we're both interested in ideas.
yeah.
So, coming even to the same thing differently can look like conflict. So I appreciate the example he's bringing up with this 25-year-old girl. And so you see this absolute purity and innocence as if that's a good thing. But then he outs it as feelings of abandonment and orphanhood that she's trying
Well,
not to access.
yeah, and we can't ignore the impact of ideation. Okay, in other words, you can get a bad idea and not act on it. And this is in part the shadow. And, we try to protect ourselves from these things, but we can't really. And I'll give you an example. Um, when I was in college, I had a professor who literally saved me. I went on active academic probation uh, in my freshman year of college. There were reasons for that. But in any case, because my parents were in Japan, and that was far away at that time, um, he became my person in loco parentis and literally saved my college education and my career, my life. Uh, but I remember on one occasion sitting in one of his Asian studies lectures and thinking I had a Tommy gun in my hand and I was shooting across his chest. I remember having that idea. And I remember it wasn't a good idea. Um, and um, anyway, I still remember that incident in my own ideation. Okay. Now, fast forward to today, and I have a student who likes to take his fingers and aim it at me and go like that. Okay. As if he's shooting me. And this student has already been put on as kind of probation uh, in our legal system. And in most schools, certainly in all the schools in Maryland, I believe, if a student does that, it has to get reported to the um, school resource officer, to the police officer that's now stationed in your school. And um, because it's ideation, which, with the availability of weapons in this country, can lead immature people, and it's very often it's young people that get involved in school shootings. Um, that ideation can lead to going home and getting a gun and starting to shoot things up. And we had the case in Virginia where, I don't know, a 6-year-old or something, a kindergarten child, came in and shot his teacher. Uh, and so we've really,
Well, I think
you
you
can
really,
have that ideation. And so,
I think you've brought up an example that actually speaks directly to the difference between now and 30 years ago. Whereas 30 years ago, that ideation would be metaphorical or
mhm,
an analogy or simply actually expressive, probably of he respects you. So he's fighting against you to learn how to win in life.
mhm.
Whereas now it's so literal. And honestly, with the lack of nutrition that's given to most people, um, the brain fog that makes everything literal. And I just read something yesterday that part of that brain fog is that without the protein and such that people need, the hippocampus stops making, I think it's the hippocampus, stops making new nerve cells, new neurons. And what happens is then there's a finite ability to remember things. And so the brain starts erasing earlier memories to make room for the new ones. But the problem with that is they don't have context of themselves and their experience. And then what happens is they can only follow along with the current narrative and do what they're told. So there's a whole, slavery thing going on in terms of how the psyche is even working now relative to even 30 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean, so
Sure.
you're right there
Yeah.
on the front lines of it.
Yeah. Sheree asks, why hasn't anything been done since the school shootings started since Columbine regarding gun laws? And, it's become a issue for a very strong gun lobby in the United States that convinces people that they need to have a gun to protect themselves. And in most cases, I think owning a gun, I think if you own a gun, you're 17 times more likely to die by a gunshot wound. And but people get crazy. Like I have a high school classmate who claims he has 50 weapons. Well, you could only fire one at a time. And I asked him, why does he have so many weapons? And he says, well, because the government is going to come and take my guns away, and I want to protect myself. And I said, well, your government has tanks and F-18s. If your government wants to do something,
we're not a threat. Yeah,
you're not a threat. You're not a threat. Your government will succeed. No doubt about it.
I think what's interesting, it's not gun control, it's self-control. And it's a psychic epidemic or a psychological epidemic of, very piss poor decision making, because I think the only people who are affected by gun control are law-abiding citizens. And that just makes more guns for criminals. So I think you offhandedly glut the gun market for criminals to pick up more if law-abiding citizens get theirs taken away, notwithstanding 17 times more likely to, die by a gunshot wound or be shot if you have one, because the whole when in Rome. Now you're thinking about that. You've brought that into your environment. Mm-hmm. So there's a conscious piece there to understand the responsibility of the things that you allow in. But I find a lot of gun control arguments are naive with some pure goodness,
very naive. And meanwhile, one thing we could do in many of these cases, one thing that we could do, very simple, that could resolve this in many ways, is if your homeowner's insurance, your insurance for negligence, your negligence insurance on your homeowners or your rental policy said that if you own a weapon, it has to be kept under lock and key. Okay. If that rule was in insurance so that you wouldn't get paid if something happened.
So when someone breaks into your house, you die because you can't get up. Hold on while I unlock this cabinet. I mean, there's a whole thing that goes.
The reality is, if somebody's going to break into your house shooting, you're going to be dead before you even get to your weapon, whether it's locked or not. But if somebody wants to do that, they can do it. And so the reality is that many of these cases, including the one up in Connecticut, which involved my friend Janet Robinson, who I went to high school with, and she was the superintendent of schools up there when that happened. What was it, Sandy Point or something like that? Not Sandy. Sandy Hook, yeah. And that killer got that weapon because his mother didn't have it under lock and key. And many of these cases are young people who do these kinds of things, who don't have the maturity to think things through. And so, it's just there's some very simple things that could be done, including requiring that provision in homeowners or renters insurance that would cut down on this tremendously, in my view.
Well, and I like the whole meme from a lot of Southern people where the doormat says, "The door is locked, not for our protection, for yours. If you enter, I hope you love Jesus because you're just about to meet him." So, and it's like you enter my house. I mean, I kind of grew up with, well, we hope you kill him. Because there's responsibility and you can't tolerate that kind of stuff. And people are like, oh, I can't do anything. Once you've crossed that line, the mouth zips shut and you are not in your territory anymore. You're in my house. Yeah. So that's not kicking and screaming and petitioning and convincing. It's sucks to be you. I mean,
well, there are thousands of books written on this topic, so I'm not going to let us divert any longer with it. But the reality is that, as has been said by Cherie here, that we live in a sick society. We do, and the amount of gun violence that we have in the U.S. is just bonkers, crazy beyond any other country. And
that's a technology piece where people can act out with a ballistic device.
Yeah.
And the problem is acting out before, well, you probably would flame out, tire out before you actually hurt somebody. People would wrestle you down or, hey, chill out, let you run around like a crazy person. But now they just pick up something, and instead of having to connect the dots like in normal hand-to-hand, you're 300 feet away, and you can get no bearing on your environment. It's something from out of your environment with someone else acting out can come influence you. And I think that's part of the crazy is the technological access.
Yeah, and kids come up thinking, because they see television programs where people are killed and there are no consequences, kids get fascinated by the idea of killing. And so, for example, in my school, I very often am asked the question, did you kill anyone in Vietnam? Meaning, did I personally shoot somebody in Vietnam? And the answer is, I never personally shot anyone in Vietnam. I did fire my pistol 5 times at a beer can that was floating in a lake, but I didn't hit the beer can. Number one, and I never fired my weapon at a person in Vietnam. Not that I wouldn't have done if I needed to, but I had no occasion to do that. And it's not because I wasn't in battle, because I was, but it wasn't my job to have my pistol out firing it. I was an officer, so I was supposed to be leading people, not busy firing my weapon. And so anyway, I get kids are fascinated by that question. And come November 11th, I intend to wear my Marine Corps uniform to school. And I have shooting badges that say rifle expert, pistol expert. But that doesn't mean that I feel I have a need to have a rifle or a pistol around. Um, so anyway, let's go on though. If you want to go talk about the gun lobby, we can do that another
Well,
time.
I think you just synopsized the whole thing with just because you have a hammer in your hand doesn't mean you need to go around looking for nails. There's
Yeah,
a responsibility to what any given situation deserves, requires, or necessitates. So I think your responsibility piece there, and frankly, 30 years in the martial arts, I'm not running around trying to kick everyone's ass, you know?
yeah,
In fact, quite the contrary. I can see what causes conflict you know, more than most. And at the same time, there can be a calmness under fire. Doesn't mean you're a pushover. It means you're observing. So you brought up basically the responsibility to the tools we have at hand.
yeah. Cherie says, Skip, the Iran-Contra affair, question mark. My brother was a Teamster. He drove trucks. I'm I'm not connecting the Iran-Contra with the trucks. I don't understand that connection, Cherie. But um, the Iran-Contra thing was the raid into Iran that was led by my classmate Oliver North. Was a really um, wacko idea right from the beginning. And because one of the helicopters, nobody bothered to think about the fact that in the desert, in a sandstorm, a helicopter will crash because it gets sand in the engine, which is what happened. And it caused 8 Marines to be killed before they could rescue the others. Um, some things are not very wise, and um, I can't I can't say that Oliver North is the wisest man I ever met. I've had lots of connections with him over my lifetime. Uh, I wouldn't say I'm his friend, not at all, but I've been in his presence and shook his hand a few times, um, and I haven't had much respect for him um, I haven't had much respect for him since June the 12th, 1968 at 8:05 in the morning. I even know the date and the time.
Do tell, or not. It's
No, we're
it's
going to talk
yours.
about Billy Budd now.
Yeah,
The
we'll talk
last,
about Billy Budd now. Okay.
I mean, more relevant would be another classmate of mine, Rich Higgins, who was hanged by Hezbollah in southern Lebanon when he was leading the UN peacekeeping force, which has now been attacked once again um, by this time by the Israelis. And so that was in the late 1980s. I don't remember exactly what year. It was either 87 or 89. But Richard Higgins, you can look him up on Google. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Higgins was killed in a battle that's still going on, and that this is 35 years later. So it's just wacko what's happening in the Middle East. The last of Herman Melville's works, his masterful novel Billy Budd, portrays the angelic character of a young man innocent as a flower child and free of any malice, which leads to his destruction through the projections of a master at arms who is filled with envy, hate, and cruelty. Melville dramatically traces his fate in the play of two opposites, innocence and evil, in the figures of the two characters. Rollo May, in his work Power and Innocence, also mentions Billy Budd and endorses Arthur Miller's opinion that the perfection of innocence indeed is madness. He considers the attitude of innocence a way of refusing legitimate power, very often making a virtue of such an attitude. He provides the etymology in Latin, innocens, not harmful. To be free from guilt or sin, guiltless, pure, and in action, it means without evil influence or effect, or not arising from evil intention. May distinguishes between two kinds of innocence. One has the quality of imagination, as for the poet and the artist, and preserves the childlike clarity in adulthood, leading to spirituality, therefore a source of purity and newness. The other is irresponsible childishness, when innocence that cannot include the demonic becomes evil. When innocence that cannot include the demonic becomes evil. The first fits Jung's description of the evil archetype, of the child archetype, I beg your pardon. The first fits Jung's description of the child archetype. The second is pictured in Melville's character. It is rather pseudonymous,
Pseudo-innocence.
Pseudo-innocence, a kind of fixation in the past, childishness rather than childlikeness. This sort of pseudo-innocence leads to utopianism, where we do not need to face the real danger, and even though it claims to be a virtue, it is not. It doesn't make things clear, only simple and easy to avoid the tragedies and complexities of life. In endorsing innocence, we cannot recognize the destructiveness in ourselves, leading to a sort of complicity with evil. Billy Budd wasn't capable of noticing an enmity, not being suspicious or distrustful enough. Although it dates from 1972, Power and Innocence still means a lot today. It remains a perspicacious description of how individuals and groups behave and made vulnerable by simplistic life slogans, denying all desire for power and supposedly remaining above evil to avoid having to face and assume the reality of power. Such avoidance eludes responsibility and opens the way to explosions of violence. The innocent person in religion, the one who lacks the wisdom of the serpents, can do considerable harm without knowing it. May also emphasizes avoiding any religious premises that Melville had already remarked that spirituality is opposed to innocence. Yet Jung, like Jung, May advocates the urgent necessity to promote awareness of the good and evil in each one of us, inescapable from the experience of life and accepting responsibility and blame for human actions. In short, according to the author, the answer to the problem of evil in humanity will not be given through innocence and exemption from sins, but rather by accepting that evil will always be our adversary. The problematic posed by evil and destructiveness permeates Jung's work, and even though he did not postulate the notion of a death instinct, he recognizes the aggressive, destructive polarity in psychic energy. In Symbols of Transformation, he wrote, "Libido is not only a ceaseless forward movement, an an unending will of life, libido also wills its own descent, its own involutions, death, thereby circumscribing the life and death instinct within libido itself. Also, in the Red Book, he writes, quote, "You are not forced to live eternally, but you can also die, since there is a will in you for both. Life and death must strike a balance in your existence," unquote. Okay, I'll stop there for a moment.
Yeah, I think that the big thing here, the difference between childish and childlike. Childlike is observant, bat-dar kind of radar, sees what is connected. And childish is throwing a tantrum, and which means you're just locked in the past and you're trying to get attention or whatever you're trying to do.
Yeah.
But it's just unacceptable behavior. And childlike, though, has curiosity and wonderment. Childish has just a bunch of empty barbs shooting out. So I think that it's interesting here that goes back to Fizz's question or statement of, is my shadow different than Stalin's shadow? And I wrote down here, childish tantrum Stalin, and it's interesting because except a childish tantrum with the levers of power right at his disposal. So I think being careful, got it, and being careful with when are we childish, when are we childlike, and I think from that, if you're a parent, you understand, and sometimes you don't reason with children. You teach them, you instruct them, you lead them, you guide them. And it's sometimes, it's not an ignoring of neglect. It's that's really not priority here. So not every need is met, because I think what happens is then with childlike, somewhere along the line, someone has taught you to distinguish between needs and wants. And basically eating and drinking, hydrating, they're the needs. Everything beyond that may be close to need, close to want. So for example, I don't need to pay my phone bill, but if I want to have a phone, I need to pay my phone bill. That means I want to have my phone, but it's not a basic need. So I think what's interesting here is with childish, they are their own little world. And they're just raging against the machine of anything outside. Whereas childlike might just listen to rage against the machine. And I think what's interesting here is the ability to distinguish, what do I have that's driven by fear, childish, versus what do I have that's driven by curiosity and wonderment? And I find that that's an important distinction in these last few paragraphs, that, the innocent person, the one who lacks the wisdom of the serpents, the one who can't go down deep in the dark and confront those fears and confront things with curiosity and wonderment, instead of being overwritten by surprise tactics of someone else who actually is not connected to their outside world, i.e. throwing a tantrum with levers of power. So here, the childish versus childlike, I would just simply pen as childish is driven by too many external forces, except they're only perceiving themselves, and childlike, driven by curiosity and wonderment. And you're back.
Yeah. There's I see these issues around childish and childishness very often in my work these days, because I'm working with adolescents. Typically, they're 13 years old. I have one 11-year-old that I'm working with. And they, at some level, I have to let them experience evil. Okay. And it's hard to it's hard to quantify. I know a lot of my colleagues are, desperately like to catch them if they're vaping, for example, and they hide their vape, and now vapes don't smell like cigarette smoke because I guess the smoke is kept within the the water vapor or something so that it doesn't smell. Um, but
Actually, it's an oil, and it
huh?
burns. But anyway, it's an oil, and it burns the lung tissue. So what happens is it's not really combusting tobacco in the same way.
Right.
It's ingested nicotine in a different way. And so it doesn't, I'm always amazed someone, exhales and it's like you're walking through a cumulus cloud and
Hmm.
there's absolutely no smell at all, which
Yeah.
is wild.
Yeah. So it's putting the nicotine in your lungs by water vapor instead of by smoke, I guess, is what
And
the answer
oil.
is.
The problem is
Yeah.
oil. And oil
Right.
oil burns differently than water. Um,
Yeah.
so anyway.
So anyway, but I have to remember in my work, and I say, why are we so fussed about this? Marijuana, for example, and we have children who come to school high these days, and I say, why do we have to worry about this? This marijuana is legal in Maryland, and the point is that um, they're still underage, so they can't really make a proper judgment for themselves. Um, and that's all well and good, but then I look at my students and the environment they live in, which has a lot of drug dealing going on in their communities. And I have to say to myself, well, they have to learn to live in that environment. I mean, it's not the environment I personally live in, but they have to learn to live and survive in that environment. And they have to learn how to stay alive. Okay. One of my colleagues told me that sadly, um, about half of the kids that she had taught at our school, which is an alternative school, um, is are dead by the time they're 25. Um, they literally die before they're 25, or by the time about half are lost. And so I know that, and but it's like the piece in Donald Colson's book about trauma, uh, where he says, you see a child playing on the playground and they're full of joy and everything, and it's your job to give them as much childhood as you can, notwithstanding the fact that that they have leukemia or something and are going to be dead in a year, whatever it is. And
Yeah, and I think it's childhood. Give them as much childhood to combat those things that are always going to come forward in life. And that way the goodness is there.
yeah,
One of my primary instructors years back never flinched ever. And so his whole mantra was, well, why move 3 inches when the blade's only 1/4 of an inch wide? So you invariably, he would always never attack you. He would just intercept you because he didn't go anywhere. So you did all the action. But one day he took me aside and he said, I'm gonna tell you something. I grew up in a war zone.
mhm,
He goes, I don't flinch because I've already seen it coming. The reality is he was responding to sound waves, the concussion, the part of the concussion blast that comes before you actually hear it. So he's responding to pressure changes in his environment.
Yeah.
And it was quite an interesting radar to understand that that kid who grows up in a war zone might have a whole different sensibility than you do to how to deal with affects that come in their environment. And it was quite eye-opening to understand that if you utilize all of your senses, you don't always have to, believe what you see, believe what you think. You actually will kind of feel like you're in water. So, I mean, give the child as much childhood as possible, even though a year from now they will be taken from leukemia. Give them as much life as possible. It's really, I think, what's.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, I have one of the questions I always ask my students, especially the ones that get in trouble in my school, and I have to, when they have detention, I have to visit them. That's part of my task. And one thing I always ask them is, when are you going to grow up? And because many times they behave like a child instead of behaving like a young adult, let's say. I won't say it's a mature adult. But okay. We're back. Okay, we had a short break in the computer connection.
Yeah, we heard it all. Their video froze, but the audio was good.
Okay. So okay, we can symbolize the death and life cycles, as well as the cycles of creation and destruction, within the myth of sacrifice that harbors pain transformed into an act of renovation, perhaps due to our capacity of resilience. And if, in fact, we observe complex psychic processes and deep needs for change that entail destruction in order to go forward to build new attitudes, we observe involutions of a psychic nature without any exit psychopathic disorders, disorders, cruel behavior inflicted on someone rendered vulnerable, massacres, tyrant power, blind and deadly fanaticism, and myriad other expressions of what we may understand as incurable, unalterable evil. Psychiatry has tried to give a name to the non-comprehensible, to evil. Psychopathy, although not all those considered to be psychopaths commit criminal acts. Guggenbuhl Craig explored the theme of absence of moral sense and eros in psychopathy, in psychopathy. While James Hillman suggested some deficiency of a constitutive nature, as if those deriving from a bad seed found in violence a mode of transcendence, a mode of going beyond the ordinary human so that it becomes inhuman. In order to control inhuman demonic aggressiveness, he proposes that we need to find modes of ritual through the arts and collective ceremonies which allow excessive, extravagant demonic force to find a way of expression. Nevertheless, mercilessly annihilating one's fellow man is likewise human, with or without a causal reason to justify such an act. And no matter what psychiatric nosology decides, a frightful, terrifying, and unfathomable attraction toward evil exists, throbs, and pulsates in the human being. Okay, you want to comment on that?
I think what's interesting too is Dr. Georgia Ede, psychiatrist at Harvard, has recently done a study with a colleague of hers with long-term schizophrenics, put them on a complete carnivore diet, high protein, high animal fats, completely against the food pyramid.
Mm-hmm.
And within 2 weeks, all of their brain fogs start to release. So just one thing I wonder here is environmental considerations and lack of proper health will incarcerate these contents inside. And in a sense, there's always a prison riot going on inside, this war between your ears. Whereas then with health, even instead of intellectualizing this or psychologizing this, good health, removing brain fogs, releases those contents from being incarcerated inside, and then they don't riot all the time. And so it's interesting, it's new thinking that's coming out, but I find it interesting that just you are what you eat can bring to bear more of a healthy psychological state from ingesting food that's good for your body instead of processed foods, seed oils, all that stuff. And I think what's interesting, it hits right at the anchor of we try to intellectualize our way through things and psychologize our way through things, when the reality is eat what you need and sense your environment inside and outside. So it's just a different, I think, counterpoint here than Guggenheil Craig and James Hillman, where they're still up here in the intellectual stratosphere.
Yeah.
Instead of what's really driving the situation. I kind of feel like they're close, but they're shooting in the dark. And I think if you get to who you are and not knowing thyself, I think that's asking too much. Being able to drive yourself. I mean, do you have a driver's license for yourself? Do you realize that every fifth word is going to be an expletive if you're in Tourette's or what have you? How do you navigate that? So I think what's interesting, I would add to the Guggenheil Craig and James Hillman, what about good health and how that then brings it to where you do not interfere with your own thinking.
Yeah. Well,
Kind of
I mean,
the obvious in a way.
I know that my perspective on dealing with my students is a Jungian way that wouldn't, it certainly is not accepted in our school district because, I often look the other way when I see, the passing of whatever the kids are passing to one another in school, because, and it's hard to deny them. I know they're going to be, I know they have to live in this environment that is in their lives. It's not in my life, but it's close to my life because last week, mid to late 40s woman shot another mid to late 40s woman in the parking lot of our Safeway, and I go by that grocery store every day. I rarely go in there, but
I think actually with the kids, looking the other way, I think there's actually, you're imparting some respect. You're not interfering in how they are operating, and they're trying to learn to navigate. And it's not always some criminal this and that. I think what's interesting is, to me, that one piece right there, you're teaching them rather than trying to indoctrinate them.
Yeah.
And when you teach, people can think for themselves. The problem is thinking for themselves could be bad for most governments. But the thing is, we need that to have a healthy society. And so in a sense, you're allowing them to learn from experience. And also, you're also probably teaching them to not distrust leadership so much in all capacities, only in the capacities when it doesn't deserve it. I mean, Mark Twain said, I'm a patriot always. I'm behind my country, and I'm only behind the country the government when it deserves it. And I think that guts of that quote are pretty much the notion of the sheep will live their life in fear of the wolf, only to be eaten by the shepherd. So look at what's really, who's really pulling the strings in the context. So with you allowing yourself to look the other way, it's not that they're getting away with something. They're navigating their life, notwithstanding the powers that be.
Yeah.
And I think that's important.
Yeah, Richard Casper says intellectualism and evil can go hand in hand. Giving reason for evil compounds the sin to God, but the reasoning can be used as an excuse in our eyes.
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
Well, I think intellectualism. I mean, I grew up in academia, and I had a big dose late in life of getting rid of this. The academic ivory tower. Oh my Lord! The embellished adjective New York Times art critic review of, my Lord, can you just let something be? And I find that what happens is it's show ponyism. How brilliant can I come across instead of, can you just say what is there? And I think the intellectualism creates this high and mighty, allegedly brilliant piece, but it shields you from what's going on because you keep trying to discover what went on. So
Yeah,
in a sense, the intellect is always living in the past, and that's just going to cause a bunch of sluggish inertia that's
yeah,
not responsive
yeah.
in an entrepreneurial way.
Sherry says, does one think our entire American education needs to be reformed? And what I would say, in my observation, especially having taken up public school teaching in the last 2 years of my life after a very long entrepreneurial career, is, fundamentally the answer is that it needs to be half reformed. Okay, because what happened was about 40 years ago, it seems, uh, they the idea of rationalism, Freudian type psychology,
Mm-hmm.
entered into the school systems, and now they have sliced and diced every course in K through 12 down to the point where, in theory at least, every seventh grade in our county is teaching the exact same thing on the exact same day. I mean, in theory, that's the way it's supposed to be. And this is what you're supposed to be teaching in the first 15 minutes of the class, the next 15 minutes, and the next 15 minutes. Well, our faculty just goes, because it's just not possible with our kids. I mean, um, every day I have two adults, me and one other, in a classroom with one sixth grader, and it's not enough adults, um, because a third adult would do something else. Um, and I won't say what, but in any case,
Enough adults to adults.
well, I mean, I have one teacher that uh, is very good at sort of jamming information into a mind that's not listening. Okay, and uh, I tend to come to the story very differently. And so, for example, and this particular teacher won't let me get a word in. Okay, and so
So that's tyranny.
now wait a
That's
minute, yeah, right, and so, but I give
Oh, your video froze.
And the student can take a 5-minute break between each 12-minute segments. And so she considers those 12 minutes her 12 minutes. And so yesterday or the day before, I guess, she we finished with the Pledge of Allegiance, and I asked her for permission to speak to our student about the Pledge of Allegiance, as that student hadn't gotten up. And she said, well, not during my 12 minutes. You can do it during his break. Well, no, then that means I don't get a chance to do my teaching. And
that's, again, tyrannical and childlike, defending boundaries that are unnecessary. She's afraid of not having attention paid to her.
Yeah, that's what she's afraid of. And she's afraid of me because I guess I come in as a fairly intimidating figure, since I have twice the amount of higher education than she has, for example.
And she wouldn't have to worry about that if she was childlike, because she would be able to lead from the qualifications of she's alive.
Well, she knows her subject matter much better than I do. Okay.
Well, and the thing is, that doesn't give her. Here's what's interesting: is she has competence but no confidence. And the problem with a lot of evil is that it has confidence with no competence. So there's a difference between manipulative versus actual healthy influence.
Right. So in any case, I wanted to make some comments about the pledge, and it wasn't to force the kid to stand for the pledge, because he has the right not to stand for the pledge. That's fine. And indeed, I served in the military for 23 years so that people have the right to burn the flag, to destroy the flag, to desecrate the flag, and to not stand for the pledge or the national anthem. That's America, and that's what I believe, that they have that right. However, I wanted to express to him a little bit of what it means to me to stand for the pledge. And, I was going to take 2 minutes, but anyway, she's jamming the subject matter down his throat. So, and my point was that the things that I would have said are every bit as relevant to the subject matter as what she would have said. Okay. Except for a detail, perhaps. But what the child needs to learn is, why it's important to do what I do. To me, he doesn't have to be important to him, but it's why it's important to me, and why it's important to lots of people, because, and I see that you are moving, so maybe you haven't lost me, but
something was irrelevant. I wanted to look it up before I spoke with what you're talking about with your colleague who's, ramming information down the throat of an uninterested mind.
Yeah, and so she refused to give me that moment. It would have been maybe 2 minutes that I wanted to speak to the kid. And she didn't want to give him that 2 minutes to hear my side of the story, which is very relevant to what she's teaching too, and might change his perspective on the way he's learning something.
But it brings up, I think, the example, which is really apropos here, you're actually looking for the good of society by looking for listening to that person
Yeah.
and working with that person, not with taking some canned, toxic educational soup that I have to complete in this amount of time. That teacher has presenteeism, and that's dangerous for a business for sure. But at the same, just blindly walking through life and, oh no, I have to get this done in this amount of time so I can go home. You're actually caring about an individual, a person,
Right.
which teaches a whole different lesson. And what's interesting is it's like you're like the coach of the 49ers offers Colin Kaepernick a job, after he had called out the narrative so long ago of NFL owners. Well, I heard someone last week, I still laugh about this. That, he's quarterback, but his new nickname is Throza Parks. So,
Well, so in answer to Cherie's comment, we've sliced and diced the education system to rationality, complete rationality, without talking to any kids. Okay, basically that's what it amounts to. It's the same as the consultant is the person who knows 150 ways to make love but doesn't know any girls. Right?
Oh, that's yeah. There you go.
Right. Well, it's
Yeah.
Some educators know that all the slicing and dicing and want to be doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing at the precise minute. But oh, by the way, we have actual children here
Well, yeah, and
that we have
all
to
the
communicate
rationalism,
with.
that's a bad business model. It's one thing to have a company vision, a
Yeah.
mission, and implementable policies, but at the same time, those are just so you have a clear view through the windshield. You still have to navigate all the things that are going to mess up, go bad, go
Yeah.
great, be
And
finished.
yesterday I had to go to a half day thing, professional development thing. And so we have people from the county coming in and rationally telling us all the things that we need to co-teach together. But they have no clue what my school is like. And there's just no chance in hell that I can my co-teacher and I, who we had to go as a partnership in order to be even accepted in this program, there's no way in hell we could implement it in my school. So they've given me a half-day training, and I have to go for another half-day training, which is absolutely useless to me. Okay. And so I'm not saying all the information was unusable, but a lot of it was. And
A bunch of talking heads probably wrote down a bunch of things that made too much sense to be worth a damn.
right. And so Jung is about the irrational. And if you want to have rationality, go to Freud, right? That's all I can say.
And please don't do that.
Yeah.
Don't limit yourself
Okay.
by, so.
All right. Well, I'm going to stop here because
Yeah.
this is a long essay she has, a fairly long essay. We still have many pages to go, and so we'll start talking about we'll start on page 199, talking about some of the essays in volume 10 of the collected works of C.G. Jung next week. This is the book we're using right now, Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions. And we're continuing to use this volume 1. And these are loosely the topics that we're covering week by week. There are 5 volumes of it, so it's going to keep us going for quite a while.
I'd like to offer a sum up to your teaching experience to me, especially with that one student, is a real seed of goodness, of the difference between tyranny and leadership, indoctrination and creativity and connection, childish versus childlike.
Mhm.
And you then become someone that child can actually see, and not over there up by the board, hidden in the crowd. The whole world is their oyster. I mean,
Mhm.
so when even then, you teaching by leading rather than by babysitting, as it were, I think is a really good analogy, metaphor, and just a specific concrete example of what the education system needs, instead
Yeah.
of indoctrinating a bunch of, basically I look at a lot of educational protocol and I always scoff. It's like, oh, that makes way too much sense to be worth a damn. Those people will die in battle. They will
Yeah.
not survive in the wild because they'll always be asking for permission.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Okay. Well, I hope we're not William James's book, The Variety of Religious Experiences, is a good book. I recommend it. I hope we're not talking heads, at, at least not in the pejorative sort of
yeah.
way. um,
Well, I think the thing too is the comments from a chat um, can be there to keep us honest. I mean, if we go off on some intellectual rant, then it's like, oh yeah, rein us
yeah.
back.
Yeah. So Roberta Harvey says, my education included an 11 plus at age 11, and I was penalized because my birthday beginning of September that I was an automatic fail. Now, why exactly was this in place? Well, I mean, why it was in place is because the school district has to have a cutoff point on when they accept kids into kindergarten. And so the kids who are born in the spring or in the winter get a little head start over the kids that are born late. Because I know my birthday is October 5th, and it meant that I was sort of the youngest of my school group. And a very good friend of mine who I've known most of my life for more than 65 years, um, his birthday is exactly 6 months um, senior to mine. And but we were in the same grade. And so he got to live life, 5.5 years, whereas I guess I squeaked into the year group and was sort of the youngest in the year group. And so, some of the kids were, bigger, physically more mature than I was throughout my growing up years, right? In fact, even when I finished in the Marine Corps, I was still like 175 pounds, and I'm now 220. So,
Well,
so
you bring up an example there too, isolating kids based on age. That's the first indoctrination piece of taking people out of context. They're learning to problem solve in a limited environment. Whereas if you group them, maybe not even have school until second grade, so to speak, but
mhm,
let them, have them play like they're supposed to, get them to at least 6 or 7 when they switch from mom nurturing to dad structure formative. And then you can start to put some rules and things. But
yeah,
I think that having kids isolated by year, especially even, I mean, I was born in December. So I was always angry that I didn't get to go. I'm ready. I'm ready. Well, then I was older. Well, the
mhm,
problem is then I'm like, wow, you guys are having more fun. You're younger.
Mhm.
They're like, well, you're stronger and bigger. I'm like, well, but you're having fun. I mean, so there's a whole back and forth. But I think isolating kids by age is actually one of the hidden in plain sight obvious problems, because they aren't even functioning in context in a classroom relative to life.
Yeah. Interesting. Sherry says that she did see Simon and Garfunkel in Central Park in 1981, and that's terrific. You're one of the few that has ever acknowledged they were physically there. But I was definitely there for the same concert, but it was in Japan, in Korakuen Stadium. And there were only 40,000 at my event because that was the seating of Korakuen Stadium, which was a baseball stadium in Tokyo. But I was amazed because I was in Japan, and here these guys who were my musical heroes at the time and kind of always have been, um, were so popular in Japan. And it was extremely touching. And when it came for an additional encore, everybody lit their cigarette lighters because Japanese people tend to smoke a lot. So there were all the men had cigarette lighters, and they were lighting those up so that, to show that they wanted to hear more. And that was a wonderful experience. And so anyway, and by the way, I've been listening to Paul Simon's 1991 Central Park concert, which was to 750,000 people. It's quite an awesome concert recording. And it was a solo performance, except, I mean, not solo in that there weren't other musicians, but there wasn't. Art Garfunkel was not there. And so it's just incredible to see a singer that can just hold forth for an hour and a half like that. Incredible. And especially the intensity of the songs that he was singing were pretty amazing. Anyway, they're my favorite.
So I gotta get going too.
Yeah, me too. So peace, thanks. See you next week, everyone. We'll continue with an imagination for evil next week. Hopefully we made some progress today.
Have a great week.
Yeah.